Now, the Nigerian constitution provides for a democratically elected government council. The constitution, a local government council rather. The constitution is clear that local governments must be administered by elected people and state governments must work with them to establish a framework for democracy. But in reality, this is not the case in many states in Nigeria. Democratically elected local government councils are routinely removed by state governors who, with the support of state houses of assembly, replace them with unelected local government interim, caretaker, or transition committees before the expiration of their tenure. Examples abound of this, even though the Nigerian Supreme Court has declared the action of the governors unconstitutional. Well, now, one of Nigeria's most respected constitutional lawyers, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, who's a senior advocate of Nigeria, has tried to stop this by taking the governors to court in an attempt to prevent the federal government from allocating funds to these unelected local government committees. But the court held that it is the local governments that are entitled to statutory allocations and not local government officials, and therefore the case was lost. Well, for more about this, I'm joined now from Lagos by the constitutional and human rights lawyer himself, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, senior advocate of Nigeria and former president of the Nigerian Bar Association. Olisa, very honored to have you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. How did that court case go amiss? I mean, you took them to court and it seemed like all the elements were there for a victory, but then you lost.
I lost on a very technical point. The issue why I lost wasn't that the court did not recognize that the case was a good one. But the court then said that to deprive the local governments of funding would create more difficulty than the question whether the local governments were democratically elected. I found that a bit, with due respect to the learned judge, I found the logic a bit warped, which is why I've gone on appeal. And I hope that on appeal, I should establish the principle that the federal government cannot fund non-elected, non-democratic governments. And as you know, right across Nigeria, since 1999, it's been the habit and practice of state governors, in collaboration or in collusion with the state independent electoral commissions, not to hold elections, to the point where even the Attorney General of the Federation himself, Abubakar Malami, chastised one of the state governors and called upon the state governors to recognize the consecrated provisions of Section 7 of the Constitution. So it's a big challenge that is out there, and one that I think Nigerians should engage more, should we want to bring about the much desired change that we look for in Nigeria.
And that's an absolutely crucial point, isn't it? Because local government is supposed to be closest to the people at the grassroots level, and therefore its functions have to be put in place and enforced.
No, absolutely. There's a big challenge. I think part of, on reflection, part of the error, maybe civil society, the human rights community have made is to ignore the local government electoral process. And as you rightly pointed out in your introduction, the Constitution gives the local governments what I'd like to call constitutional autonomy. But the problem is no one wants to go to the local governments. And I was happy that at the recent program we had on Saturday, organized by the platform, the point was made very succinctly that all it takes actually to be a councillor at the local government level is to win 500 votes. I personally am dissatisfied with the state of the Apapa Port district. But rather than moan and write articles and appear on TV, why shouldn't I go and contest to be a councillor? in the Apapa Port District, so that the issues that I see here of road congestion, traffic, poor infrastructure can be challenged. So people should remember that it is a lot easier to get into the local government structures. And when that happens, I think that we can begin to turn around the narrative. I mean, just looking at what happened in Hong Kong after the one-year-old protest by students, they've taken 65% of the local government structures in Hong Kong. And I'm sure they will elevate up to the state and the national levels. But when we all seek to go for the presidency without the experience, without the funding, without the structures, we make a mess of it. So I think that part of what we might see as the new call is for an advocacy around electoral processes in the local governments of Nigeria. Because that's where we can make an impact. And if we make the impact there, we can now force state governors to respect the constitutional autonomy of local governments. And that will bring about the desired change that we see. Because as you rightly pointed out, the scope of functions ascribed to the local governments in the Constitution is very, very wide. The local government is where people live. I don't live in Anambra State. I don't live in Lagos State. I live in the local government. It is the local government that says a lot about the welfare and security of the people who reside in it. But unfortunately, the local governments are emasculated because their powers have been emasculated and removed unconstitutionally by the governors of the states.
A very interesting point and very clearly made. I wonder why that has been the case, though. Why is it that the local governments, I mean, if you go to the UK and all the rest of it, I mean, the local councils are the most effective when it comes to running things and you know, ensuring maintenance and all the rest of it. Why is it that it is that way in Nigeria?
I have absolutely no idea, Charles. Absolutely no idea. It could be that people would say, what's in being a councillor? I just don't know why. To be quite honest with you, that's the truth. I don't know why. But I think what can be done is to say, hey, there's a new realization that in the 20 years we've pushed democracy at the presidential and the gubernatorial levels. Why haven't we found time to spare a thought for the local governments? So whilst I can't provide an answer why we've ignored the local governments, it's never too late. It's never too late. People can do it. Retired judges, retired lawyers, retired doctors, anyone who has a concern for his environment can organize the neighborhood and look for just 500 votes. I don't think that's asking too much. And I think that would bring about the desired change. Because as I made very clear when I had a chat with Governor Fayemi, who is the governor of the chairman of the Governors Forum, I said, we spend far too much time on the federal government than the state government, than the state governors. It's time to turn attention to the. I mean, you're obviously aware that the courts have been out for the last 6 weeks, all because the governors of the 36 states will not obey the provisions of the Constitution that says that financial autonomy for the courts. It's taken 3 cases, one by the judicial staff workers and 2 by me, one at the federal government level and one in Ekiti State. So we have 3 court decisions staring the governors in their face, yet they wouldn't obey the court decisions. But if we had a very strong presence at the local government, obedience of the Constitution will become the order of the day. So the point is, we need to have our governors, and I'm concentrating on the governors, we need to have our governors obey the provisions. There are some states that never conducted local government elections in 12 years. So they'll get the money for the local governments, keep it in their state purses, and the local governments are completely non-existent, apart from just paying salaries. That has got to change.
It's very interesting what you say, and I'd like to come back and talk about that some more, particularly the fact that these local governments are seen as uncontrolled centers of corruption, but also the very critical issue you raised about financing and funding, and things to do with the fact that allocations are being withheld. We'll come back in a minute and talk about that. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the circumscribed role of local governments in Nigeria with a constitutional lawyer and former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, in an ideal Nigerian world, local governments would have a key role to play in fighting poverty, redistributing oil wealth, and in helping to manage Nigeria's resources. Sadly, there is no ideal Nigerian world, at least not yet. Local governments in Nigeria are supposed to be closest to the people. Their constitutional functions include, among other things, the maintenance of roads, lighting, parks, markets, open spaces. They're also expected to redistribute wealth and management resources at the grassroots level. But the local government system has often been abused and neglected by the states, and the result is that its impact is not felt by the people. So now there are growing calls for local governments to play a bigger role at the grassroots level. And Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, the constitutional lawyer and senior advocate of Nigeria, who's calling for the enforcement of democracy at the local government level in Nigeria, is still with me from Lagos. Thank you for staying with us. And I mean, generally speaking, the local governments have often been seen as uncontrolled centers of corruption, haven't they? I mean, the federal government makes a huge statutory allocation of funds to local governments every month, but there is nothing to show for the disbursements. So rather than spending the money on projects that have direct impact on the lives of local people as prescribed by the Constitution, most local government chairmen and councillors are accused of only paying staff salaries and then the rest of the money just disappears. I mean, is that a fact?
Yes, that's generally a fact, generally speaking. But the reason for that, I think, is because state governors see the local government process as a very important structure to keep office. Don't forget, the local government structure starts from the ward. So from the ward, it builds up. And so in the last 20 years, without exception, the proper role of the local government, rather than governance as prescribed by Schedule 4 of the Constitution, is an electoral process where the person who desires to win will ensure that he has enough people manning the various wards. So all you need to do is pay them enough to keep them happy from one electoral cycle to the other. A very clear example would be how come Ambode lost in the elections to which he wanted to come back as governor. It was because he didn't control the local government system. That's why he couldn't make it. So the local government structure is not seen as a platform for governance, doing all of the things that are so eloquently set out in the Constitution, whereby the Constitution gives them, the local governments, constitutional autonomy to do the very things prescribed. Rather, the role has been turned upside down 360 degrees, usurped by the governors, who now put their people in various wards, and they make them happy. So when the allocation comes through by virtue of Section 162 of the Constitution, and it is shared according to the three levels of government, federal, state, and local. As I'm sure you are aware, the allocation to the local government is paid to the states, not to the local governments, and that's the problem. It's paid to the states, and at the entire discretion of the state governor, whatever he wants to pass on to the local government chair will be passed on. And certainly not enough is passed on. Just enough is given for the local government chair to desire to be there as a political stooge for the governor. So as a result, in the last 20 years, this process has diminished the capacity and interest of Nigerians to play an active role at the local government level. But it is reversible. That's the point I want to make. It is entirely reversible if we begin to concentrate effort. If you think through the point that all what you do, if you have a child, the child would need to be registered by the registrar of birth. On death, it is the same local government. All these things I'm describing, even marriage, they all take place at the local government. So the very basic mundane things occur at the local government, or let me say at the ward. So why is it that we do not show enough attention or interest? That's the big gap, and that's the big if. And the big question now is, in 2023, are we going to see people desire to play an active role as councillors? I don't mind leading the process in Apapa district. I mean, if we pull all the guys together, the big issue here would be, why is it that Apapa generates 20 billion naira a day for the federal government, and our roads are so decrepit? Why can't I come out as a councillor and mobilize other people to come out? And then we dominate the local government system here and make a difference. Get the roads fixed, get water done. But no, what we do is everybody wants to be governor. So we play the role at the level of the governor or the president or Abuja, the National Assembly. But the Apapa business district that has a local government structure is ignored. So it is important that we begin to think through the fact that if we want to rebuild Nigeria, we've got to start at the bottom, the local government.
Absolutely. The grassroots quintessentially important. And you've raised some very interesting points there, because at the moment, local and state level governments are supposed to control roughly about 40% of Nigeria's money, mostly oil money, really. But I'm sure you're across this development that the NNPC, the state oil company, is saying that it can't afford to pay any money at all into federal coffers for May and June. And I'm just wondering what sort of constitutional problems that throws up.
That is more than a constitutional problem. That's a massive financial problem. But I was happy yesterday when I heard the Minister for Finance talk about the need to do something drastic about the cost of governance. So I said, about time. You recall that Mr. Orosoya, Steve Orosoya, my good friend, published a report, I think in 2012 or 2014, calling for a drastic reduction in the size of government. We have about 3 to 4 million public servants. And I don't mean this as disrespect to public servants, but look, 3 to 4 million public servants consuming 80 to 90% of the resources of the country, there's something wrong. The civil service is just too big. And I was also happy to hear Ben Akabeze, Director of Budget, talk about the rising cost of governance. In 2018, it was about 2 trillion. This year's budget, it's about 7 trillion. It's out of hand. And if you are running a domestic household and you are spending, and your spend is more than you're bringing in, you've got to take a decision. So now that money is running short in Nigeria, I think people are beginning to look at new and novel ways to cut the budget. So we simply have to reduce the level of spending at the federal, state, and local governments. We have to rethink the number of bureaucracies we have. I saw 2 or 3, agencies on the TV yesterday. I had never heard of them. I'm not sure what they do. If we have 7,000 public agencies, do we really need all of them? So this is the time to ask hard questions. This is the time to bring government to its little size. Government is far too big.
Okay, well, I could talk about this forever with you, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, but unfortunately we're out of time. I wish we had more time to get more into these things. Dr. Olisa Agbakoba is a constitutional lawyer, senior advocate of Nigeria, and former president of the Nigerian Bar Association. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including the biggest ever gathering of tech leaders and digital entrepreneurs Africa has ever seen. We'll hear from one of the key speakers at that mammoth conference. Stay with us.